Hi, guys. Next up, we have got Martin Bulmer, the principal researcher at Moby, which is a Wellington-based startup where he is part of a small product team that's turning a 10-year-old SaaS business into a sassy product business. Martin has a wealth of experience in all things UX. As he likes to say, he's been working in the digital industry since before the internet started. He spent the past decade working in media, web, and usability agencies in the UK and New Zealand. And along the way, he's learned a lot about user research, research operations, interaction design, information architecture, and how to fit research into the agile life cycle. Sorry. So fun fact, because Alex shared Martin's fun fact about the car. But his other one is that he got taught presentation skills by the Vicar of Dibley's best friends. Martin, you are full of great things. Over to you.
Hello. Yeah, it's really great to be here talking at this conference. Hasn't it been amazing? I feel kind of, in a sense, lucky second last here, having had the opportunity to see everybody else's talk and try and raise my game to the level that everybody else has achieved. It's been amazing. It's really good. Let me share my screen. You've probably heard that a lot. All right, there we go. That one. There we are. All right. So this is a story about stories and the power that they have to guide us. At the end of this talk, you will have the knowledge to become a better researcher, powered by stories. Says he. Oh, let's move on. There we go. So let me tell you a story to start off with. So in 1922, F.W. Murnau produced an expressionist horror film in Germany. In it, an estate agent called Hutter is sent to Transylvania to assist a new client called Count Orlok. So on the way, he pops into the local tavern, finds all the villagers terrified of Orlok. They've barricaded the windows. When he gets to the castle, there's weird things happening: blood-sucking, brides, madness, biting. Now, as I'm reading this out, I know what you're all thinking. And it's the same thing that the estate of Bram Stoker thought prior to suing for copyright infringement, and they won. So all copies of the film were destroyed, except one, which happened to be in the States, where Dracula was already out of copyright, which is how we know and can enjoy this film today. So Nosferatu, which is the film, differs in many respects from Dracula. So how do we know that one was stolen from the other? So according to narrative theory, stories refers to the building blocks that you start out with, the events, the characters, the place, and so on. And your narrative weaves these stories elements together to give them shape, to communicate a message. So when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, his narrative was mostly about sex and disease and death and fear of foreigners, a great replacement theory that we're becoming way too familiar with right now. And Murnau basically took the last of these narrative elements and turned it all the way up to 11, because his film was just coming out around about the time that fascism was taking off in Europe. So despite renaming characters, moving some of the locations and other story elements and chopping and changing and stuff, there's just too much of the original story to disguise that blatant theft. We can all see it because we all know how stories work. I only had to mention the word Transylvania and you're already like, got it. So same story, different narrative. But what kind of drives the narrative? So that's the storyteller's intent, their objectives when planning the film or the book. So let's change tack for a minute now and go back to when I used to work at Optimal Usability. So here we are, or at least most of us. Somehow I've managed to weasel my way into the middle, not quite sure how. Looks like I own the company, Portrait. Sorry. We spent some considerable time teaching ourselves service design, just as it was kind of springing up as a discipline. And Trent got this really kick-ass conference talk out of it, where we ended up, the three of us, going to Sydney, which was terrific. one of the methodologies that I chose to learn about and then teach back to the rest of the team was storytelling. And we're probably all of us well familiar with storytelling now. We don't even really kind of think about it in terms of how we use it in the materials and the artifacts that we create. But basically, the principle is you use storytelling as a service design methodology to explain a set of findings or insights or implications to the stakeholders that are paying for the work or who've requested the work. And what you try to do is tell a story featuring a real or made up real person so that the stakeholders can basically engage with the content that you're providing them. Now, you would have seen this already, this little hillock, because it was in Jason's talk, but this is the narrative arc or story arc, if you like. And I'm going to run through it in some detail here, just in case you don't know anything about it, and because it makes sense for the rest of my talk. So starting on the left-hand side, you've got the exposition, which is the point at which you introduce the characters. So this will be, for example, the 11th birthday in The Lord of the Rings, which is a very long exposition, takes forever to get through before the hobbits even head off. In terms of the story itself, it's actually 40 years or something between the 11th birthday and Frodo leaving the Shire. Conversely, William Gibson's Neuromancer does very little exposition, and that's principally to try and kind of make you feel out of place and a little uncomfortable. It's only like a third of the way through the book that you finally get a hang of the patois that he's introduced, and you have to go back and reread the book. And if we look at P.G. Wodehouse and his Bertie Wooster stories, his exposition doesn't do one really. He just hits the ground running with Inciting Incident, because what he's trying to do there is make you feel like you are just one of Bertie Wooster's friends, and you know all about Bertie, and you know his backstory. You don't really need to be told about what's Toddly Towers or whatever. Now, the next thing that happens is an inciting incident. So obviously, in The Lord of the Rings, that's when the Black Riders hit the Shire and, whoops, beg your pardon, and everybody, gets on their bike and heads out of the Shire. And that's followed by the rising action, which is where tension builds within the story. So that's, all the way through Bree and all the way through Weathertop and so forth. And then you get to the climax, which is in the Fellowship of the Ring, at least anyways. The action at the ford of the river just near Rivendell. But in fact, for the whole of the Lord of the Rings, that climax is the point at which they chuck the ring into the cracks of Doom, into Mount Doom, and there's the Battle of Black Gate. And then falling action. Stories don't just tend to end at the climax, because you really need to kind of wrap things up for the people in the story and basically give your kind of understanding of what that story meant, the kind of homily that you might have. So this will be the point in the falling action where, for example, Frodo wakes up and there's Gandalf. Yes, dead Gandalf, and that's explained. Then there's the resolution, the kind of like, okay, marriage of, Strider and all of that sort of thing, and then denouement, the final goodbye at the heading as some of the hobbits and Gandalf head off to the west. So Freiberg used this model basically that he created to study stories and narratives. He didn't invent the arc as such. It's been around for as long as humans have been telling stories to each other. For example, as soon as the snake turns up in the Garden of Eden, we know bad things are going to happen and that the idyll is going to be destroyed. So narrative theory basically explains like we're all storytellers in effect. Every one of us is telling a story with our life as we go along. And it's the reason, as storytellers, we're all storytellers. You can play Once Upon a Time with your kids. So you say, once upon a time, there was a dragon, and they'll fill in the next bit because they know how this works, and they also know how to subvert it, which is the really interesting thing. So about the same time as we were doing all this service design stuff, I attended UX New Zealand, and I went to a workshop that was run by the incredible Caroline Jarrett. So her workshop was about surveys that work. And it featured the amazing survey octopus, which you should really look into. And by the way, you should also go and buy her book, which is an amazing piece of work. It's just come out. And in the course of that talk, she talked about this thing, the most crucial question. So as her experience, as a forms designer and survey expert, she had come to the quite reasonable realization that big honking surveys, as she calls them, don't work. You're unlikely to get them completed. People get bored halfway through. They start answering like anything in the A column because they can't be bothered. So you're much better off running a survey that's kind of targeted and small as possible. So in your survey that you were going to do, what's your most crucial question? Can you just answer that one? Ask that one, sorry. Sometimes you can't just ask that. Sometimes you need a little bit of kind of like before and after in order to make some sense of that. So some introduction to that question, and then some questions that might actually help you cross-tabulate subsequently. Now, I don't know about you, but I was sitting that, and I immediately started adding up the two things that I had been thinking about at this point. So is this most crucial question the kind of climax of the survey? You've been leading up to it, and now you're going to kind of reflect upon it. But what about other research methodologies? Does this kind of make sense for those as well? So I sort of, like in the workshop, I sort of literally started mapping it out. And let me run through it with you now. So let's say you've got a usability session or an interview. What's the exposition? That's basically when you do the scene setting. So it'd be like, hi, I'm Martin. I'm from so-and-so, and this is my friend Daniel. He's going to be taking notes. What we're going to be doing today is I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we're going to go through some stuff and rah. So you're introducing things, and you're basically saying, like, what's this story about? But what you don't do is say, oh, and halfway through, I'm going to ask you whether or not you find our search results useful, because that's essentially blowing the gaff. You've done spoilers there. You don't really want to have to say that. And even within the kind of introductory emails that you might send to people to say, here's the session, you're not going to say, this is what the thing's about necessarily. You give them some clues, but you don't necessarily give the game away. Now, in doing this exposition, the second you start doing it, your participant's going to latch on to, right, I understand what's going on. I understand the story we're telling together here. Okay, so what's next? The inciting incident. Instead of saying the Black Riders are arriving, you say, tell me about the last time you, or how often do you, or tell me about your job. That's usually an easy question for somebody to answer. Hence the reason it's slightly going downhill here. So session's off at a pace here now. And as soon as you start asking, as soon as they start answering that sort of question, you can go, tell me more. And you start layering and understanding it in terms of that participant, what their lived experience are, what their attitudes are to something, what their current behaviors are, particularly those. And you're going to be heading towards your most crucial question, which is next, the climax. You've laid the groundwork. You understand exactly what their worldview is, and so do they, because it's at the forefront of their mind right now. So you can hit them with that point. So it'd be like, great. So you've told me that the following things are important to you when you're searching or looking for property. So have a look at these search results right now and tell me whether or not they answer your questions. No, they don't. It hasn't got this, hasn't got this. It's in the wrong order. Don't like the images. Now they can give you a really coherent answer. And it may be that you're actually tackling a most crucial issue. There might be several things that you want to ask about rather than one thing at this point. But nevertheless, you've set the groundwork here for them to answer that in a reasonable manner. And then it's the falling action. So the cat's out the bag. They know why you're here. They know why they're here. Now you can ask all those questions that you wanted to ask earlier. So a minute ago, you said this. Tell me about that. And you're basically tying up all those loose ends that you weren't able to talk about earlier on. And it's where you're going to ask follow-up question after follow-up question. Everything is downhill from here, pretty much. Then we hit resolution. So you can say, so how does this make you feel? So what do you think about this now that you've seen it? Have you got any questions, any final thoughts? If this was what you saw when you were at home, how would you feel? What's your most important takeaway from today? And it gives them a chance to use their second thoughts. Those Granny Weatherwack's second thoughts, which is second thoughts from Terry Pratchett. And then there's the denouement. which is basically the end. All sessions need a good end. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever interviewed elderly gentlemen, they have a tendency to say, this is a great chat. I could keep going at this forever. And it's very difficult to get them out the door. So make sure you've got a sensible wrap up within your script, within your discussion guide. Make sure that you remind yourself to give them the gratuity rather than, oh no, and you're rushing out down the street to give them the voucher. When you send them away, say, if you have any final thoughts, here's my email address, or here's my number, you can text me. So, of course, a roller coaster can have many kind of points of climax. You're going to go up and you're going to go down, and that might be the case in any session as well, because you may not just have one objective that you're trying to meet. And by the way, if your primary objective doesn't match up with your moment of climax there, your most crucial question, then your entire session is out of whack and you really need to think about what you're doing. Nevertheless, if you've got like multiple loops here that you're going around, just make sure they're not too many. You don't really want people to come out of the session feeling sick and wishing they could get off. It's not the best experience. So thinking about a bad research session, those that I've seen feel like a seemingly random set of questions that don't relate, where the participant has to expend mental energy going, what's going on here? Like trying to build a storyline, like why are they asking this? So you're better off not doing that. You're better off actually providing them the structure for the session that allows them to understand where things are going, why you're heading there, even if you don't necessarily say where the destination is. So an interrogation is great if you're a police officer and you're trying to catch people off guard, but we're not police officers, all of us generally. We're people who are trying to understand people's lives and allow them to communicate that in a structured, reasonable manner. If your session, and I've seen some, is just a random set of questions, the person who's had that experience is going to come out at the end of it going, I don't think I did very well there. I don't really know what they wanted. I don't really feel like I communicated what I said very well anyway. And they certainly won't want to speak to you again, probably, because the experience would have been quite unpleasant. A better session experience is one where you can provide really clear story cues. For example, that beginning, middle, and end that you saw in Jason's slide, so that your participant can follow the narrative and not feel disoriented. So plan the session so that the questions fall in the right order. And this is where you do your best work, if you like. Look at each question and go, if I ask this question now, how much will it bias my most crucial question? Or how much will it bias any subsequent question? Shall I move it forward or backwards in the kind of rising arc? And if I ask it now, has the participant already moved on? And it should have been with that lot. Okay, move it forward. Order all your questions so that they make the most amount of sense, and so that when the person gets to the most crucial question, they can answer it in the most meaningful manner. Now, you want to do this in as light a touch way as possible. You don't really want to be driving people on rails towards it. They don't want to feel like they're being strong-armed into an answer here. And this is where my roller coaster metaphor probably becomes unhelpful. If your session is good, you should allow your participant the opportunity to divert and tell you some stuff. But because you've taken the time to actually think about how the session is structured and what questions you're going to ask, you can guide them back on because you know where the rails are. You're not working in the dark here. Oops. There we go. So going back to talk to when I was telling you about narrative and story, the story arc is how you guide the overall session and use your objectives and your research skill to guide the narrative. So this fits, doesn't it? It makes sense. I've used this approach in structuring and running hundreds of sessions, and those times when I don't do it, when I'm like, oh, just jam the script together, I know it's going to go badly. And I know that I'm like halfway through, I'm trying to busk it and go, oh, how do I get them back to the thing? Oh no, I just said that thing that's ruined the most crucial question. Oh, I've just biased the whole session. So doing this kind of planning and thinking about the narrative arc and thinking about what's the experience that your participant's going to have is really going to help you become a better researcher. Now, this works for like all the in-person research you can do, and that includes kind of remote in-person stuff. And to some extent, it works for some of the kind of like not in-person, the kind of asynchronous stuff. So when you're thinking about a survey, think about the order of the questions and think about like, how's this question here going to impact any subsequent question? And where's my most crucial question? Can I make sure that that comes at the right point in the survey? So that's my story. I'm done. What story are you going to tell?